You know when something's off in your house. That feeling when the woman you married starts acting like a stranger? Well, that's exactly what happened when my wife's friends decided our marriage was their business. Let me tell you how a group of bitter, divorced women nearly destroyed what we built together. It started small. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. Whispered conversations that stopped the moment I appeared. My wife, who used to share everything with me, suddenly became secretive about her girls' nights out. These weren't just casual changes. This was deliberate. The first red flag came during dinner one evening. Out of nowhere, she asked me if I ever felt trapped in our marriage. Not concerned, not curious, but like she was fishing for a specific answer. I set my fork down and looked at her directly. "Do you feel trapped?" I asked back. She fumbled with her words, talking about how her friends were asking her questions about our relationship. Apparently, they'd been planting seeds of doubt about whether she was truly happy or just settling. I could see exactly what was happening. "Let me guess," I said, keeping my tone steady. "These are the same friends who can't keep a man for more than 6 months?" She got defensive immediately, started talking about how they were just looking out for her, how they cared about her happiness. But I knew better. Misery loves company, and her friends were professional misery distributors. Over the next few weeks, the changes became more obvious. She started questioning every decision we made together. Why did we buy this house? Why didn't we travel more? Why was she doing all the cooking when we both worked? Questions that never bothered her before suddenly became major issues. The breaking point came when I overheard her on the phone with one of these friends. She was complaining about how I never surprised her anymore, how our relationship had become predictable. Meanwhile, I'd planned a weekend getaway just 2 weeks earlier that she'd barely acknowledged. When she hung up, I didn't let it slide. "So our marriage is boring now?" I asked, walking into the living room. She tried to backtrack, but I cut her off. "No, I heard what you said. You think I'm predictable. You think our life together is mundane. Is that really how you feel? Or is that what your friends told you to feel?" The conversation that followed revealed everything. Her friends had been systematically dismantling our marriage in her mind. They convinced her that settling down meant giving up her dreams. They told her that married life was supposed to be more exciting, more spontaneous. They painted a picture of single life as this amazing adventure she was missing out on. "They're right about one thing," I told her. "You do have choices to make. But understand this. If you choose to listen to women who destroy relationships for sport, don't expect me to compete for your attention. I won't beg you to see what we have." She accused me of being controlling, of not wanting her to have friends. Classic deflection. I wasn't trying to control her friendships. I was pointing out how her friends were controlling her thoughts. "Look around," I said. "Show me one of your friends who has what we have. Show me one who's built something lasting with someone. They're not giving you advice from a place of success. They're giving you advice from a place of failure." But the damage was already done. She'd been convinced that our stable, loving marriage was actually a prison. Her friends had convinced her that she needed to find herself, that she'd lost her identity in our relationship. The final straw came when she announced she needed space. Not a weekend away, not a few days apart. She wanted to separate temporarily to figure out what she really wanted. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't try to change her mind. "You want space," I said. "You'll get all the space you need. But understand this. When you walk out that door, you're not just taking a break from our marriage. You're choosing to end it. There's no trial separation. There's no coming back when you realize the grass isn't greener. You leave, and you stay gone until you're ready to commit completely." She expected me to fight for her, to promise I'd wait, to negotiate terms. Instead, I gave her exactly what she asked for, a choice with real consequences. Her friends had convinced her that I'd be lost without her, that I'd come crawling back begging for another chance. They told her that men like me always take women like her for granted until we lose them. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, she packed her bags while I made coffee and read the news. No dramatic scenes, no emotional manipulation. Just a man who knew his worth and wouldn't compromise it for someone who needed to be convinced of it. As she loaded her car, she kept looking back at me, expecting some kind of reaction. But I just sipped my coffee and watched her drive away. Her friends had gotten what they wanted. Now they'd have to live with the consequences of their advice. And she'd have to learn the hard way that some decisions can't be undone. The first week after she left, her friends were all over social media celebrating her freedom. Pictures of them helping her move into a cramped studio apartment. Posts about new beginnings and living your best life. They made it look like she'd escaped from prison instead of leaving a comfortable home and a man who loved her. Meanwhile, I didn't change a single thing about my routine. I got up at the same time, hit the gym, went to work, came home. The difference was that now I had complete control over my environment. No more reality TV shows I didn't want to watch. No more compromising on dinner plans. No more listening to her complain about her day while I tried to decompress from mine. Her friends expected me to be calling her, texting her, showing up at her new place begging for another chance. Instead, I did something that apparently shocked them all. I improved my life. I started that woodworking project I'd been putting off, reorganized the garage, had some buddies over for poker night without having to ask permission or deal with attitude about it. The house became mine again, and honestly, it felt good. Her friends were posting pictures of their girls' nights out, trying to show the world how much fun single life was. But I could see through the social media facade. These women were in their 30s and 40s, hitting the same bars they've been going to for years, trying to recapture something that was never that great to begin with. After about 10 days, I started hearing things through mutual friends. Apparently, my wife was struggling with the financial reality of living alone. The studio apartment ate up most of her income, and she was discovering that her friend's idea of supporting her didn't include actual financial support. They'd convinced her that she needed to experience life as a single woman, to date other people, to see what else was out there. But when it came time to actually do it, she was hesitant. Deep down, she knew she'd thrown away something real for the fantasy her friends had sold her. I ran into one of her friends at the grocery store. She tried to make small talk, probably fishing for information about how I was handling the separation. I kept it brief and polite, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes when she realized I wasn't broken up about it. "She's doing really well," the friend said, trying to get a reaction. "Good for her," I replied, grabbing my groceries and heading to checkout. That wasn't the response she expected. She wanted me to ask questions, to show I was worried or jealous. Instead, I treated my wife's departure like what it was, her choice to make and her consequences to live with. The second week brought more reality checks for her. Her friends started being less available when she needed help moving furniture or when she wanted company on weeknights. Turns out, having a friend who needs emotional support is a lot less fun than having a friend who's stable and doesn't require constant attention. I heard through the grapevine that she'd been complaining to her friends about feeling lonely. The same friends who told her that marriage was holding her back were now telling her that loneliness was just part of the journey to finding herself. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I'd forgotten how peaceful it was to come home to a clean house that stayed clean. How nice it was to make plans without having to negotiate with someone who might change her mind at the last minute. How good it felt to focus on my own goals without having to constantly reassure someone else about theirs. Her friends started posting less frequently about their girls' nights. The novelty of having a newly single friend to corrupt was wearing off, and they were beginning to realize that supporting someone through a separation was actual work. By the third week, the cracks were showing. One of her friends posted a passive-aggressive comment about how some people don't know a good thing when they have it. Another one started liking old photos of my wife and me together on social media. The tide was turning, but it was too late. My wife had made her choice based on the advice of women who'd never successfully maintained a long-term relationship. She'd traded a stable partnership for the approval of people who were threatened by her happiness. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her friends had convinced her that I was the problem in her life, that I was holding her back from reaching her potential. Now she was living alone, struggling to make ends meet, while I was more content than I'd been in months. I didn't gloat about it. I didn't post anything on social media or make any public statements. I just continued living my life, improving myself, and letting her experience the consequences of her decision. Her friends had promised her that leaving me would open doors to new opportunities, new relationships, new experiences. What they delivered was a cramped apartment, financial stress, and the slow realization that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. But this was just the beginning. Her friends were about to show their true colors, and she was about to learn that the people who encourage you to burn bridges are rarely the ones who help you build new ones. The real test was coming, and I had a feeling her support system was about to crumble faster than her marriage had. The fourth week after she left was when her friends started showing their true nature. The same women who'd been posting inspirational quotes about sisterhood and supporting each other suddenly became very busy when my wife needed actual help. It started with small things, She'd ask if someone could help her move a dresser, and they'd have excuses. Work was crazy. Kids had activities. They had dates. Always something more important than helping the friend they'd encouraged to blow up her life. I heard about this through our mutual friend who worked with her. Apparently, my wife had been complaining that her support system was disappearing right when she needed it most. The women who'd been so eager to give relationship advice were nowhere to be found when it came to practical support. Her financial situation was getting worse. The studio apartment was expensive, and she was discovering that living alone meant paying for everything herself. No splitting utilities, no shared grocery bills, no backup when unexpected expenses came up. Her friends had painted single life as liberating, but they'd forgotten to mention the part about it being expensive. When she asked her friends for help with a loan to cover her security deposit, suddenly these women who'd been so concerned about her happiness became very quiet. They'd push her to leave her marriage, but they wouldn't put their money where their mouths were. The real revelation came when she found out why her friends had been so invested in ending her marriage. Through some social media detective work, she discovered that one of her closest friends had been going through a bitter divorce and couldn't stand seeing her happy. Another friend had been single for years and was tired of being the only one without a partner at social gatherings. These women hadn't been looking out for her best interests. They'd been looking out for their own emotional needs. They wanted company in their misery, and she'd been their target. The breaking point came when she caught her friends talking about her behind her back. She'd arrived early to meet them for dinner and overheard them discussing how needy she'd become since the separation. They were complaining about her constant texts, her need for emotional support, her financial struggles. "She's become so high maintenance," one of them said. "I thought she'd be more fun once she got rid of him, but now she's just depressing to be around." That's when it hit her. These women hadn't supported her decision because they cared about her happiness. They'd supported it because they wanted her to be as miserable as they were. She confronted them that night, and their response was predictable. They turned it around on her, saying she was being ungrateful, that she was the one who'd changed, that she was taking her frustration about her situation out on them. But the damage was done. She could see clearly now that her friends had used her as a pawn in their own emotional games. They'd convinced her to give up something real for something that didn't exist. Meanwhile, I was doing better than ever. I'd started dating again. Nothing serious, just casual dinners with women who appreciated a stable, mature man. Word got back to her friends, and suddenly they were concerned about her feelings again. They started posting things on social media about how men move on too quickly, how they never really loved you if they can replace you so easily. Classic projection from women who'd never experienced real love themselves. My wife was watching all this unfold from her cramped apartment, working longer hours to pay bills she'd never had to worry about before, while her friends pretended to care about her welfare when it was convenient for them. The woman who'd left me to find herself was discovering that the self she'd found wasn't nearly as happy as the self she'd been when we were together. And the friends who'd promised to support her journey were showing their true colors now that the novelty had worn off. She was learning a hard lesson about the difference between friends who celebrate your happiness and friends who celebrate your misery. Unfortunately for her, she'd chosen to listen to the wrong group. Her friends had gotten what they wanted. They'd successfully destroyed her marriage. But now that she was dealing with the consequences, they were nowhere to be found. They'd moved on to their next target, their next project, their next opportunity to spread their misery. She was alone, struggling, and beginning to understand that she'd been manipulated by people who didn't have her best interests at heart. The women who'd convinced her that she deserved better had delivered something much worse. And the man they'd convinced her to leave was thriving without her, proving that sometimes the best way to show someone what they've lost is to simply move on and be better without them. The friends who'd promised to catch her when she fell were letting her hit the ground hard. By the 6th week, my wife was completely on her own. Her friends had moved on to whatever drama was keeping them entertained that month, leaving her to deal with the mess they'd helped create. The group chat that used to buzz with activity about her new life had gone silent when she actually needed support. I found out about her situation through my neighbor, whose wife worked with one of her former friends. Apparently, my wife had been reaching out desperately, asking for help with everything from moving furniture to borrowing money for groceries. The same women who'd been posting about female empowerment and supporting each other were suddenly too busy to return her calls. The reality of her situation was hitting hard. She was working overtime just to cover rent on that tiny apartment, eating cheap meals, and spending most evenings alone while her friends enjoyed their regular social lives without her. The exciting single life they promised her turned out to be isolation and financial stress. She tried reaching out to me indirectly through mutual acquaintances. Casual questions about how I was doing, whether I was seeing anyone, if I seemed happy. I kept my responses simple and neutral. I wasn't angry or bitter, but I also wasn't available for her emotional support. One of our mutual friends eventually told me directly that she was struggling and seemed to regret her decision. My response was straightforward. She made her choice. Now she gets to live with it. That wasn't what people expected to hear. They wanted me to show concern, to offer help, to demonstrate that I still cared. But caring about someone doesn't mean rescuing them from consequences they chose for themselves. Her friends had painted me as controlling and unsupportive, but now that she was living without any support at all, she was starting to see the difference between a partner who had expectations and friends who had none. I'd expected her to communicate, to be loyal, to work through problems together. Her friends had expected nothing from her except drama to keep them entertained. The breaking point came when she had a minor medical emergency. Nothing life-threatening, but she needed someone to drive her to urgent care and pick up prescriptions. She called her friends first. Every single one had an excuse. Work commitments, family obligations, prior plans they couldn't change. She ended up taking an expensive rideshare service and handling everything alone. That night, sitting in her empty apartment with prescription medicine she could barely afford, she finally understood what her friends had actually given her: nothing. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my life exactly how I wanted it. I'd reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during the marriage, started new hobbies, even began talking to a woman I'd met at a work conference who appreciated my straightforward approach to life. Word got back to my wife about my social life, and suddenly she was posting cryptic messages on social media about people who move on too quickly, about how some people never really loved you if they can replace you so easily. The same tired complaints her bitter friends had been making for years. But here's what she didn't understand. I wasn't replacing her. I was returning to being the man I was before I spent years walking on eggshells around her insecurities and her toxic friends. I was rediscovering parts of myself that I'd compromised away in the name of keeping peace. Her friends had convinced her that I was the problem, that I was holding her back from being her true self. Now she was discovering that her true self, without the stability and partnership I'd provided, was lonely, struggling, and vulnerable to manipulation by people who didn't actually care about her. She'd traded a man who loved her despite her flaws for friends who loved her because of her flaws. The difference was becoming crystal clear. By the 8th week, she was completely isolated. Her friends had moved on to their next project, their next target, their next opportunity to spread their particular brand of misery. She was left dealing with the consequences of following advice from people who'd never successfully maintained anything long-term. The woman who'd left to find herself was discovering that the self she'd found was weaker, lonelier, and more dependent than the self she'd been when we were together. And the support system that had encouraged her to leave was nowhere to be found when she actually needed support. She was learning the difference between friends who want to see you succeed and friends who want to see you fail. Unfortunately, she'd figured it out too late to avoid the consequences. The friends who'd promised her a better life had delivered exactly what they had: broken relationships, financial stress, and emotional instability. She'd gotten what they'd given her, and now she was living with the results. 2 months after she walked out, I was enjoying a quiet Saturday morning when I heard the knock. Not the confident knock of someone with good news, but the hesitant, desperate tapping of someone who'd run out of options. I opened the door to find her standing there, and honestly, I barely recognized the woman who'd left. She looked exhausted, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair was a mess, and she was crying before she even spoke. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't invite her in immediately. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe and studied her for a moment. This was the woman who'd told me she needed space to find herself. Apparently, what she'd found wasn't particularly impressive. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. The floodgates opened. She started talking about how wrong she'd been, how her friends had manipulated her, how sorry she was for everything. Between sobs, she explained how her friends had abandoned her the moment she actually needed help, how she was struggling financially, how lonely and miserable she'd become. "They never cared about me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "They just wanted me to be as miserable as they were. I see that now. I listened without interrupting, watching her fall apart on my doorstep. Part of me felt sorry for her. She'd been manipulated by people she trusted. But a bigger part of me recognized this for what it was, the natural consequence of choosing poorly. "So now you want to come back?" I asked when she finished her confession. She nodded eagerly, like a drowning person grabbing for a life preserver. "I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. Please, can we try again?" I looked at her for a long moment before responding. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to listen to bitter women over your husband. You chose to believe I was the problem in your life. You chose to walk away from what we built together." Her crying intensified. "But I know better now. I see what they did to me. I see how wrong I was. You see what happened when your support system collapsed. I corrected. That's not the same thing as understanding why you were wrong." She tried to grab my hand, but I stepped back. "Please, I love you. I never stopped loving you." "Love?" I almost laughed. "You loved the idea of me when you had nothing else. When your friends were filling your head with fantasies about single life. You couldn't wait to get away from me." She was sobbing harder now, probably expecting me to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But I wasn't the same man she'd left. I'd learned my worth during these 2 months, and I wasn't about to throw it away for someone who'd already thrown me away once. "I know I hurt you," she said. "I know I don't deserve another chance. But please, can't we try to work this out?" I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, not wanting this conversation to happen in my home. "You want to know what I learned while you were gone?" I learned that I don't need someone who has to lose me to appreciate me. I learned that I don't want a partner who needs outside validation to value our relationship. She looked confused, like she couldn't understand why I wasn't jumping at the chance to take her back. Her friends had probably told her that men always take women back, that we're just waiting around hoping for another chance. "But we were good together," she protested. "We had something real." "We did," I agreed. "And you threw it away because some bitter women convinced you it wasn't enough. You chose their opinion over your own experience. You chose their dysfunction over our stability." The desperation in her eyes was growing. She could see that this wasn't going the way she'd imagined. "What do you want me to do?" "I'll do anything." "There's nothing you can do," I told her simply. "This isn't about punishment or making you suffer. This is about the fact that you've shown me who you really are when things get difficult. You've shown me that your loyalty can be bought with the right combination of compliments and manipulation." She tried to argue, to convince me that she'd changed, that she understood now. But I'd heard enough. The woman standing in front of me was the same person who'd chosen to believe the worst about me based on the advice of people who'd never maintained a successful relationship. "I'm not the same man you left," I told her. "And frankly, you're not worth becoming that man again. The man who compromised himself to keep you happy, who walked on eggshells to avoid triggering your insecurities, who accepted being treated like the problem in your life." She was crying so hard now that she could barely speak. This wasn't how she'd imagined this conversation going. She'd probably expected me to be grateful for another chance, relieved that she'd come back. Instead, she was learning that some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some choices have permanent consequences. And some people, once they've shown you who they really are, don't get the opportunity to hurt you again. She stood there sobbing for another few minutes before I decided to end this conversation. But as I turned to go back inside, she grabbed my arm with desperation I'd never seen before. "Wait," she said through her tears. "What would it take? What would I have to do for you to even consider giving us another chance?" I stopped and looked at her carefully. The question itself revealed everything I needed to know. She was still thinking in terms of quick fixes, of things she could do to get back what she'd thrown away. She didn't understand that some damage is permanent. "You really want to know?" I asked. She nodded frantically, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. "First, you cut all contact with every single one of those friends. Not just the ones who abandoned you, all of them. You block their numbers, delete them from social media, and never speak to them again. They've proven their toxic influences in your life." Her face showed resistance immediately. Even after everything they'd done to her, she was still reluctant to completely cut ties. That told me everything I needed to know about how serious she was about change. "Second," I continued, "you get professional help. Real therapy, not just a few sessions to say you tried. You need to understand how you let yourself be manipulated so easily, why you were willing to throw away something good for the approval of people who didn't have your best interests at heart." She was nodding now, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was thinking about what she'd have to give up, not what she'd gain by actually changing. Third, you rebuild your life completely on your own. You don't move back in here. You don't get financial help from me. You don't get emotional support while you figure things out. You prove you can be a stable, independent person before you even think about being part of a partnership again. The hope in her eyes was starting to fade as she realized these weren't simple hoops to jump through. These were fundamental changes to who she was as a person. How long would that take? She asked. I almost laughed. You're asking about a timeline? You're still thinking about this like it's a project with a deadline. This isn't about doing time until you can come home. This is about becoming someone who wouldn't make the same mistakes again. She was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said. And if I do all that, you'll take me back? No, I said simply. If you do all that, I might consider whether the person you become is someone I'd want to build a new relationship with. But there are no guarantees. There's no promise that fixing yourself will fix us. Her face crumpled again. She'd been hoping for a roadmap back to what we had, not a requirement to become someone completely different. But that could take years, she protested. It could, I agreed. And that's assuming you're even capable of making those changes, which I seriously doubt. Most people would rather stay broken than do the work to fix themselves. She looked at me like I was being unreasonably cruel, but I was being realistic. The woman who'd chosen to believe her bitter friends over her husband wasn't going to transform into someone trustworthy overnight. What about us? She asked. What about what we had? What we had ended the day you chose their opinion over our marriage, I told her. You can't unring that bell. You can't unknow that when things got difficult, your first instinct was to listen to people who wanted to see you fail. She was crying again, but differently now. Not the desperate tears of someone trying to manipulate a situation, but the broken tears of someone finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd lost. I know I don't deserve another chance, she said quietly, but I love you. I made a terrible mistake, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Good, I said, and I meant it. Regret might be the only thing that keeps you from making the same mistake with the next man who's foolish enough to trust you. That hit her hard. The idea that there might be someone else, that I might build with another woman what she'd thrown away with me. I should go, she said finally. You should, I agreed. And don't come back unless you've actually done the work to become someone worth coming back to. And even then, don't expect anything. She walked away slowly, looking back once before getting in her car. I watched her drive off, knowing this was probably the last time I'd see her for a very long time, if ever. The woman who'd left to find herself had found exactly what her friends had promised: loneliness, regret, and the consequences of choosing poorly. The friends who'd convinced her to leave me had abandoned her the moment she needed them, proving that their advice was worth exactly what she'd paid for it. I went back inside to my peaceful house, my stable life, and my bright future. I'd learned something valuable from this experience. Never compromise your worth for someone who needs to lose you to appreciate you. She had her answer now. The terms were on the table. Whether she was capable of meeting them was her problem to solve. I had better things to do than wait around to find out.